Hi, my name is Dyke Pollitt. I've had a long and successful and very happy life.
Great, we're here to talk about it.
Okay.
So, first off, um, I'd like to ask you about what it's like to grow up with six siblings and two very close brothers.
Six siblings and two good friends, yes.
What
Okay.
was it? What was it like growing up with six siblings?
Well, I'll tell you. I was number five of seven children. And then there was my mom and dad. We were all born and raised in Allentown, Pennsylvania, before ultimately moving to Interlaken, New Jersey, because my dad's job shifted from Pennsylvania Power and Light Company to New Jersey Natural Gas Company. Um, I had, interestingly, three sisters and three brothers. Um, as of just a few days ago, I lost my last brother, and so I now have no sisters and no brothers. But I have a lot of memories, and uh, they were all nifty people. My sister Risley was married to an Army officer, and then my uh, brother Irv served in the United States Air Force. And then my sister Mary Lee, who we lost to just about 3 or 4 months ago, um, was a cancer sufferer. Um, Fascinating and disappointing and kind of horrible in my life is that there have been 8 active cancers. Um, my mom died of cancer. My oldest sister originally died of uterine cancer. My next older brother from natural causes. My next older sister lost both breasts to cancer and then ultimately died not of cancer but with the effects of it. My next older sibling is my brother Doug, who beat lung cancer, and regrettably, Doug died about 10 days ago. And then there's my younger brother, Reds, uh, who died kind of mysteriously a lot of years ago. And then my youngest sister, Anne, who died maybe 3 or 4 months ago. So there were 7 kids, a mom and dad. It was a very loving family. It was an active family. We all got along pretty well. Interestingly, the oldest three, Ridgely, Irv, and Mary Lee, became kind of a triumvirate. And then my youngest sister, Ann, was kind of over there by herself because the middle three, my brothers Doug, Reds, and me, kind of formed a trilogy. Uh, and then Ann as the seventh. So I brought Ann along pretty much, not as a mascot, but ultimately as a member of that third group. So the bottom line is it was a very, very happy childhood filled with memories. One significant move from Allentown to New Jersey. And here I am. I had kind of a fun life in the middle of all those years. After graduating from Asbury Park High School, where I played baseball and basketball, I attended the University of Delaware, where the highlight was where I met a gal named Marcina O'Brien, who became my wife and is now my wife of 66 years, making me just about the luckiest guy in the world.
Okay, hold on. We'll get to that first. If you could just go back to your sibling. If you could go back to your siblings,
My what?
your siblings, your brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
Do you have any very fond memories of them when you were kids?
Most of them.
Any standouts?
Well, my oldest sister, Ridge, was very much the wife of a soldier during wartime. And that's kind of a difficult family situation. My next older sister suffered with cancer. And then my brother Doug and I became real close. He played football for Asbury Park High School. And then my younger brother Reds played shortstop for Asbury Park High School. When I went to college at the University of Delaware, I played both basketball and baseball, but mostly basketball. And then soon thereafter, I graduated in 1954 in June. A month and a half later, Marcina O'Brien became Marcy Pollitt, my dear wife. And that experience has been a magnificent 66 years.
Can you tell me about what was it like to meet Marcina?
Well, you know what? I had gone to the freshman women's dormitory to meet and to chat with the daughter of a friend of my mom and dad. Her name was Elsa Milby. So Elsa and I sat in the living room of that freshman dorm when a gal came walking down the hall, introduced herself as Marcina O'Brien, and then moved on. Less than a week later, I had called Marcina to ask if she'd like to walk through the South Campus at the university, which a beautiful, pleasant walk. And then there's never been another woman. That began this long career. So we've been married for 66 years, been friends for 68 plus years. And as I said, it has made me a very, very happy guy and among the luckiest people breathing.
That's so sweet.
I'm sorry?
That's so sweet.
Well, you know, I've had a lot of ups and downs in my life. As I indicated, there's been a lot of cancer in my family.
Mm-hmm.
8 of us in my immediate family have suffered with cancer. My mom died of it. My next older sister, as I said, ultimately died of it. My next older sister survived it. My next older brother survived cancer. My wife and I lost our first child, a 9-year-old son who died of leukemia, and that's 7. No, that's 6. And then their daughter, Brianna, had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and was very, very sick, but she's doing fine now. And then finally, me. I have prostate cancer. I experienced 35 straight days of radiation treatment followed by a surgical procedure with the surgical implanting of 82 radioactive seeds into the organ, and that has worked to the extent that I feel pretty good. The doctors tell me that I've beaten it. So out of the 8 cancers, we had a couple of losses.
When was that?
Say it again.
When was your surgery?
When was my surgery? I guess it was in no, it wasn't. It was in 2010.
Okay.
So that's, what,
Real-
9 years ago.
Okay, real quick. Can we go back? Could you tell me about your sports experience in high school and college?
Yes, I had some dear friends in high school, Asbury Park High School, who talked me into trying out for the high school baseball team. I did that. I won the job of catcher of the Asbury Park team. I had a couple of dear friends who were pitchers. One was Dick Ardell, another was, would you believe I've forgotten, a number of years. In any event, I played baseball for all 4 of my high school years, and I played basketball for my freshman and my sophomore years. Um, Interestingly, I remember the coaches very well. I remember teammates very well. I don't communicate with any of them anymore because, frankly, most of them are gone. So I am now 87 years old, and so I've outlived several of my colleagues and all of my siblings.
Okay. I think at one point you talked to me about your experience in jump school.
Yeah.
Would you mind retelling me about that experience where you...
Yeah, I'll tell you. I was very happy to be accepted as a junior officer in the 82nd Airborne Division. I joined the 82nd as a second lieutenant, and very soon after reporting to Fort Bragg, where the 82nd was stationed, I went to jump school. You make 5 jumps in jump school, all daytime jumps. They all went very well, but strangely enough, on the second or third jump, there was a second lieutenant who I happen to know who froze in the door of the aircraft. He simply would not let go of the doors. He became as strong as 10 guys, and it took an Air Force sergeant and me to pull that second lieutenant away from the door. He simply froze. And within 2 hours, he was transferred out of the 82nd. In any event, I don't remember what jump it was, but as I said, I did make 7 night jumps. On one of them, I was the number 1 guy, which was a druthers I had because I was an officer, and the first jumper out of the right door and out of the left door of the C-119 aircraft hits the ground closest to the drop zone, which means you have a lot less to walk. In any event, I jumped out of the right door of the right wing aircraft. It happens that a master sergeant, I don't mean that, I mean a, what's the right, is a, I forget. He was not an officer, but a chief warrant officer of in the 18th Airborne Corps, which was the sister or the parent organization of the 82nd. In any event, we both jumped at the same time. I landed on top of his parachute, and my chute collapsed and landed on his chute because his chute interrupted the funnel of air for my chute. And this guy hollered up to me, and his name was either Conway or Conroy. I don't recall which, and I've never been able to catch up with him because he saved my life. I don't want to say thank you. He called up to me and said, "Sir," he knew I was an officer. He was a warrant officer. He said, "Sir, don't pull your reserve parachute." We all wore reserve parachutes on our chest, and they were quick release. They would open up. And that guy down below me knew that if I opened my reserve, it would interrupt the funnel of air for the chute that was carrying us down to the ground. And instead, he suggested that I climb down his suspension lines, all of which are made of nylon. So I burned the dickens out of both of my hands, but got opposite him. We threw our arms around each other and moved down a lot quicker because there were 2 of us on one chute. And he said to me, "Sir, remember, when we hit the ground, we both want to go to the right." I said, "Mister, we bump into each other." He said, "Sir, we're facing each other. We go away from each other." Sure enough, seconds later, we hit the ground. I hit pretty hard, but I was fine. About a minute and a half later, this body was standing over me and said, "All right, sir?" I said, "Yeah, everything's good, nothing broken. Thanks very much." And he walked away carrying his parachute before I even was folding my chute up to put it in the bag that we all carry. And as hard as I tried, I was never able to catch up with Mr. Conroy or Mr. Conway again. I learned the next day that he had made his last jump, and his last jump as a paratrooper because he was transferred to a different organization. So that was a highlight of my life. When I got home, Stina knew I was later than we had thought, and I had gotten a slight concussion. But that's all. I had had my life saved by a guy that had his wits about him, and by the fact that our parachutes, mine failed, his doesn't, and that became a notable event in a lot of the 82nd Airborne Division. The word got out about that happening at night, which made it particularly unusual.
That's amazing.
Well, it is, and it's a fun story. Keeping in mind, that was my jump number 7 out of 41, which means there were 5 jumps in jump school, and then 3 jumps in jump master school, the 6th, 7th, and 8th. And the 7th jump was the night jump. We were all carrying what are called general purpose bags, which is a great big 4 feet long bag hanging from our waist down. It's used to carry equipment down to the ground. And it happened at night. And as I said, because I was an officer, I was a second lieutenant, which made me a very junior officer. I had the choice of picking where I wanted to jump in what was called the stick. There were 21 jumpers in the right stick, 21 jumpers in the left stick, in the C-119, which was a famous aircraft, and it had a long, long reputation. I understand there's still some of them flying. In any event, like I said, we hit under the aircraft, which is unusual because at flight speed, you travel 77 yards in 1 second. And he and I managed to hit each other under the aircraft. It was called the flying boxcar. It's interesting how much you can see at night. It was also fascinating that this guy who I bumped into kept his wits about him and caused me to climb down his suspension lines, which I did, and we both were in good shape.
Survived.
Now that was, I was then in the 82nd for more than another 3 years. I became a battery officer, and then I became the assistant G2 of the 82nd Airborne Division. There are 4 divisions, or 4 units in any division. There's personnel, which is the G1, intelligence, which is G2, operations, which is G3, supply, which is G4. G2 was the intelligence group, and I became the assistant G2 of the 82nd Airborne. And it was during that time that I was promoted to first lieutenant. And not too much longer, a little bit less than a year later, is when I could either re-up in the airborne or take another assignment, which I decided to do, and went to Germany for service in an artillery battalion in Wiesbaden. And my military career ended at that time after just a hair under 4 years, but they were very exciting, very fun years. I enjoyed being in the Army. I was proud of being in the Army. I was particularly proud of being a paratrooper, and I was ecstatic to have become a senior parachutist and a jump master. You become a senior at 30 jumps and a jump master when you're responsible for the other 41 guys in your aircraft. So it was a good experience.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Could you tell me about your experience in Germany?
Like I indicated, we were in Wiesbaden, Germany, which is a smallish population of about 100,000. Beautiful city. It's a spa city on the Rhine River. And I confess that Sina and I did a lot of visiting elsewhere in Germany during that 1 year there. We visited Heidelberg and we visited Munich, and we visited a lot on the Rhine River and took a couple of Rhine River cruises. Um, I was on a smallish Air Force base, but not a member of the Air Force. I was a member of the Army. So yeah, the experience in Wiesbaden, from which I retired out of the Army, was a magnificent experience.
What year were you there?
Say it again.
What year were you there? Do you remember?
What year was I there?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I graduated from college in 1954, went over there in 1959, and left there in 1960, I guess. And then soon thereafter, I was in the private life, and I was tapped on the shoulder by the mayor of my hometown, who asked me if I would serve on the planning board. And this was the town of Fanwood, New Jersey. I said, "You gotcha, I'm your guy." And I served as the secretary of the Fanwood Planning Board for a little bit less than a year, when I had the opportunity to finish jump school, spend a lot of time jumping, and got promoted to first lieutenant and enjoyed the dickens out of that. Some years later, we retired from the Army and started a different life. Airborne was a big part of it. Finding a job was another big part of it.
That actually brings me to my next point.
Say it again.
That brings me to my next point.
Yes, do.
Would you mind telling me about your job with ERP?
Yes. My dad had a good friend in sales who was a mucky muck in a smallish equipment manufacturing company. And he did a lot of work with a similar sized equipment manufacturing company called Wallace and Tiernan in Belleville, New Jersey. One of the divisions of Wallace Tiernan was a smaller corrosion engineering outfit called ERP, which stood for Electro Rust Proofing Corporation. I ultimately became the manager of ERP. It happens that was where I was when I ended up retiring from the Army altogether. And ERP, we were all airborne, we were all gung-ho, we all enjoyed spit polish, which means we shined our boots to the extent that we could shave in them. And some strange experiences with the young second lieutenant I told you about who froze in the door. That happened one other time during my experience. A guy froze in the door, but we were able to pull him out of the door. I managed to jump out of the C-119 mostly, and then the C-124, which is a 4-engine turboprop still flying, the C-123, and one helicopter. All of which were fun.
Just for fun?
Well, it was quite an experience. It was military service. I was proud of it. I became an officer, which means I had some additional responsibilities. I delighted in that. I particularly delighted in becoming a senior parachutist. It happens that when I was in the 82nd Airborne, the G2 of the division, the intelligence officer of the division, I happen to know. And he asked me, he called me one day and said, would you mind coming to work with me in the G2 division? I said, I'm your guy, Colonel. And so I became the assistant G2. That means I was the assistant intelligence officer of the 82nd Airborne Division. During that time, I became the division's escort officer, which means I was responsible for visiting paratroopers and visiting officers around the 82nd Airborne Division and all of its parts, which I delighted in doing. One of the men that was a visitor to the division who I spent some months with was Lieutenant Colonel Plutarco Albaran Lopez, who was the commander of Mexico's parachute battalion, which happens to be, at that time, the only parachute group in the whole Mexican army. And I befriended and was the escort for him when he visited the 82nd Airborne.
No kidding.
A fun experience.
A very fun experience.
And my wife, Sina, was with me during all that time. She visited me. She saw my first jump. Sina knew that I was going to be the right man, first number out the right door of the third aircraft in the V of Vs. And sure enough, I was the first guy out the right door of the third aircraft of the lead V. And she saw me jump, watched me as I came down. I hit the ground, all was well, and I had befriended a staff sergeant who came over and rattled my cage, got me standing up, and said, "Sir, we ought to go over and say hi to somebody in the parking lot." So we made our way to the parking lot, greeted Sina, gave her a hug. She gave me a hug back. She knew that, hey, I had made a parachute jump, and all was well. So, a neat experience.
That's so sweet.
Yeah, it was nifty.
I'm sure she was very glad to have you back on the ground.
Well, you know what? Yeah, she was, and I knew that she was nervous about it. And this was my first jump. It was the first jump into jump school. And I was a bit nervous, but I was not apprehensive. I knew the parachute was going to work. And of course it did. I only saw one occasion in all the time I was jumping where somebody's parachute didn't work. And this guy was a captain in the Airborne Division who parachute just shimmied down behind him, spiraled down. He landed in the trees and lived, which was amazing. And I was on the ground watching this happen. And it's the only time I ever saw a complete malfunction out of thousands upon thousands of parachute jumps that I watched.
Thanks. That is absolutely fantastic, Papa.
Well, it was all a super experience. During our first year in the Army, our son was born. Our son, Van Dyke, who lived to be a 9-year-old third grader and died of leukemia. Back in those days, when a youngster was diagnosed with leukemia, that was essentially a death sentence. Nobody survived leukemia. And there were 4 drugs available to treat the disease. There was first prednisone, and then methotrexate, then 6-mercaptopurine, and then vincristine. Prednisone worked with our son, and it put him into remission. And for all the world, you would not know he was sick until it stopped working. And we shifted to methotrexate, which never worked. We then shifted to 6-mercaptopurine, which never worked. We then shifted to what I was told was the strongest of the medications at that time, was vincristine, and it didn't work either. And he lived for just another couple of days and did not survive. But then came our next child, who was my son, who has become my best friend and who we dearly love each other. I love my family and all of it.
Could you tell me about what it was like raising Nipper?
Yeah. It happened a couple of years after losing a son. And I was very much alert to the fact that Sina and I had lost our firstborn. But we were anxious to have another, and along came Nipper. His name was Norman I. Pollitt, NIP Nipper. So he became Nipper. And he and I became, over time, just very good friends. He ended up going to college as I had, uh, and he ended up getting a job in the private sector as I had. And it was neat with his career, just as it was neat with Morse's career. During that time, Nipper and his wife, Carol, had two youngsters. The first was Alina, who was married this past September, and the second was Connor, who was married 2 weeks ago. And so they were two of my grandchildren. And the other two were children of my daughter, Marcy, had a young man named Adrian, who's not a bad guy, kind of funny looking because he wears a beard and stuff. And he has a lovely sister who, would you believe, is a champion kiteboarder, and who is still practicing, teaching people how to kiteboard and delighting in it. She's about to accept a job in the Bahamas teaching people how to kiteboard. So, yeah, those are my two kids, Nipper and then Marcy, following Boppy, who we lost, and then four grandchildren, Alina, Connor, Adrian, and Brianna.
Do you have any fun stories about raising Nipper or my mom? Anything interesting happen to them when they were kids? Did they run away from home? Did they?
No, you know what? I delighted in being a daddy. And I was heartsick when I lost my son. And not just because he was my first son or my first child, but because he was my only child. And then we lost him. And then along came Nipper. And he paralleled his brother Van Dyke. He was just a nifty kid. And he and I got along like gangbusters. And that has continued. And now he's about 61 years old. And we've had that magnificent experience. I wear a sweatshirt that he gave me that says, "I'm my son's best friend." And I think that's a truth, and I delight in it. And then along came Marcy. Marcy lost her right eye to cancer. She was one of the 8 cancer patients in my immediate family. And she suffered frightfully, but today she's my hero because she lives, she breathes, she's a magnificent parent for 2 other kids. She has formed a very successful business despite the fact that she has only one eye. So it's really quite a story.
It's a wonderful story.
It is.
Okay. Something I've always been interested in. Could you tell me about your experience working in politics?
Well,
Oh, wait, just real quick. Sorry. I'm going to move this guy out of your way. There you go. Okay.
soon after joining the borough council in Fanwood, I ran the campaign for the guy who was the mayor seeking re-election. His name was Sid Holsizer. That was my first campaign. And then I ran the campaign for re-election of a Republican congresswoman whose name was Florence P. Dwyer, who happened to be the aunt of a gal named Joan Geer, who was my friend and Cena's friend in Fanwood. Joan and I got together and formed our company, which was called Creative Inc. Our job of Creative Inc. was political campaigns. During that time, up until this year, I had run the campaigns for 312 other candidates. We had a great won-loss record it happens that I was one of the losers when I ran for the state senate and lost. But during that time, we had 312. This year, I have two more candidates, both running for the state assembly, both running for re-election for the New Jersey State Assembly, the oldest of which is now running in his 20th campaign. I've managed all of them. As I indicated, there were 312, now 314 candidates, and not nearly that many candidacies. But in some candidacies, in some elections, I had, with one client, 7 candidates, because I ran the races for 3 freeholders out of the 7, and a couple of the constitutional officers, and then some others. I ran campaigns in most of the towns of Middlesex County of New Jersey, and in some others. It was a career. Fascinating is the fact that I'm getting older, and within the last month, I have disbanded Creative Inc. That was the name of my company, and I lost my business partner, Joan Deere, in the year 2013, so that was 6 years ago. Joan died, and this year I had just the one race with 2 assemblymen, and I don't have any real assurance that I'll have another one when I'm 89 years old. The truth is, I hope I do. The further truth is, I would expect Joe Egan, who is my favorite candidate from this year, I expect him to say, hey, Dyke, if you're into it, I'd like you to run my campaign again. And you know what? I'll say yes. So that was the life of Creative Inc. Lasted a lot of years, lasted 52 years. A lot of campaigns, a lot of candidacies. Almost all of them successful, but not all.
A few short questions about politics.
Say it again.
A few short questions about politics.
Do it.
What is your experience kind of working behind the scenes of politics? Are there any shady dealings? Are there any handshake deals?
Well, you know what? I had been a councilman for 9 years. That gave me elected experience. And it got me going in election experience, that is, running the campaigns for others. I had a good reputation as an expert running campaigns. And one of the reasons was I identified and worked with and would hire again tomorrow 4 professionals. One is a direct mail professional. Another is a television professional. A third is a polling professional. And 4th is simply a printing professional. I work with all of them to some degree or another in all of those races that I've identified. All the time committed to the success of my candidates. I think, I'm not positive of this, but I think out of all those races, I lost 7, including my own. One of those years that I lost 2 was a year that a very unpopular guy ran for re-election as governor of the state of New Jersey, and a lot of people below him on the ballot had trouble. I experienced that myself. So it was a successful career. I developed a pretty good reputation in that career. I have consulted with other state organizations as part of that career. I was elected 3 times as a Republican, lost 1 time as a Republican, but almost all of my candidates, with the exception of a couple in the beginning, are now Democrats. My best friend was the mayor of the city of New Brunswick, and then a state senator, and then the Senate president, and then the acting governor of the state of New Jersey. Other of my officers similarly have gone on to higher office. So it's been more than simply a career. It's been, and more than a vocation. It's been a life experience.
Okay. My other question is, you mentioned that you ran as a Republican. Yes?
I was elected as a Republican. My family was a Republican family. I lived in a Republican town of Allentown, Pennsylvania. Back in those days, it was almost against the law to be a Democrat. And that was true when we moved to Interlaken, New Jersey, which was a solid Republican town. I served as a Republican in Interlaken for those 9 years. And then I met John Lynch, who became a dear friend. He asked me to help him in his campaign running for mayor of the city of New Brunswick. I could not say yes fast enough. And that was my first very significant race. After that came many legislative races, state senators, state assemblymen, one congresswoman, a lot of re-election campaigns with state senators and whatever. So it's been a pretty full career that's lasted something over 52 years, which is a long time.
How do you identify politically now?
Say it again.
How do you identify politically now?
How am I political now? Well, I have very strong political feelings, particularly this year. In my judgment, the United States of America is suffering through the presidency of Donald Trump. He's now served for 2 years. I believe he has emerged as a disaster for our country, a disappointment to his office, a consummate liar, a disappointment to many of our allies, and totally unqualified for office. And I say so. I am critical of Donald Trump. I hope he is not reelected in the year 2020, but he will be the Republican candidate.
Are you a Democrat now?
I am a registered Democrat now and have been for several years.
Okay. I'd like to ask you about the skits and singing that you used to do. Could you tell me a little bit about those?
Well, yeah, in college, I became a member of a quartet with a very good baritone, 2 good tenors, and me. I wasn't very good at anything, but I became the 4th member of a quartet, and we sang at other colleges, at some towns, including Wilmington, Delaware, several times at the University of Delaware. I'll never forget the experience we had singing for the first time on the stage at the University of Delaware with a full audience in this auditorium, 1,000 people. And don't you know, I made a mistake during one of those songs, and it became kind of like a trademark for me. But all told, singing and performing in skits and writing a few skits over time has been a nifty avocation. Never professionally, but often vocationally, and a lot of fun.
That is very, very sweet.
Well, it's fun. I've had a fun life. I've had a lucky life. I had, as I pointed out, a magnificent wife. I had 3 magic kids, 4 magic grandchildren, one who is sitting opposite me. And we have done very well financially. I've been able to save about $1.5 million. Sina and I own our own home in Fanwood, and we own these 2 places in Damariscotta, Maine, on Lake Damariscotta. And when you put all that together with an investment portfolio, it adds up to about $1.5 million. I delight in that because it'll create a nest egg for my kids if that need ever comes along, and for their kids if that need ever comes along. And as we speak, we are in one of the two places in Damariscotta, which is lovely. We across the way, we have a place called the Cabin. And what do we call this one?
The cottage.
The Cottage. And all three of those living places are nifty. All of them are long term. The Cabin has been in our family for 55 years. I bought this building, the Cottage, 3 years ago. And Cena and I have lived in our home in Fanwood for 61 years, all of which is great fun.
I have another question for you.
Yes.
So between you and C, you very much built our family. You got us these places, you raised my mom and Nipper, and my mom and Nipper raised me, Brianna, Connor.
You know what that's called? It's called fatherhood. And it's called abiding love. I love my family, to the total meaning of the word love. Cena, I love Cena. We loved our firstborn, although we had lost him. We love the next two kids, your mom and her brother, and the 4 grandchildren are magic. So I've been blessed with a super family, a lot of good luck, a lot of good fortune, magnificent kids.
I have one last question.
Yes.
You have given me and I think all of us a lot of great advice over the years. So what advice would you give to the next generation of our family?
The same. You know what? Be proud of what you do. Be proud of preparing for what you plan to do. Recognize that you might need help doing it and get that help. And you know what? You put those parts together, a determination, an ability to learn, a desire to learn, and then practice what you've learned. That creates success. And that will create success in the next generation.
Thank you so much, Papa.
Adrian, I delight in chatting with you, and I thank you.
It's been an absolute delight. What do you say we go have dinner?
Say it again.
What do you say we go have dinner?
You know what? That's one of the better ideas you've had. Yeah, let's do that.